Hey y'all, hope you're doing well tonight. So this is unusual for me to be filming from my home studio, but we'll try it out and see how it works. Hopefully it'll work out okay. And I hope the volume's going to work out okay as well. I've used this microphone before, but it seems like, just half an inch away or closer makes all the difference in the world, and sometimes it comes off a little loud and other times quiet, so I just apologize ahead of time if you're having to constantly adjust your volume. But I don't know where the stand is for it, but maybe I need to buy one. Maybe that's the solution. So one step at a time, right? One day at a time and one task at a time, something that I was thinking about earlier. And so just trying to give myself grace, and I hope that you do the same for yourself, and I encourage you to do that as well, right? Embrace your imperfections and just do your best and be okay with that. So in tonight's message, we're going to be talking about the different characters in, sorry, I was putting in my password for my iPad and I couldn't remember what it was. The different characters in fairy tales and folklore myth that are personifications of different aspects of one's own psyche with regards to the hero's journey. And specifically, we're going to focus on what I call forbidden love in these stories. And it's not in any kind of, unethical sense or anything like that when I say that. You'll see what I mean as we get into the discussion, but it's essentially when the main character is on this journey to either obtain a treasure or this grand takeaway or to find their true love in some cases. And there's just a lot of things that are in the way, okay, intentionally. Characters that do not want the main character to be united with their true love or to find the treasure, okay? So that's what I mean when I say forbidden. So it's something where there's dark forces that are working against the hero, right, the main character. And so we're not going to go too deep into this. I feel like this is a topic you could spend hours and hours on, really. To do it, I guess justice would be the right term. I don't know. It doesn't feel right in this sense for some reason, but to just really be thorough with it, I feel like you could spend hours and hours. But we're just gonna go over this topic and just see where it takes us, and then who knows? Maybe I'll make more videos in the future about it to expand on it. So as I was saying, I'm just going to read from my notes here. The characters that serve as villains, specifically in these stories, do so to create resistance, like I was saying, to obtaining the treasure or the forbidden love. Now, what was really interesting to me was when I looked up the etymology of the word forbidden. And so breaking it down was really crazy. So for, right, the prefix means away, opposite, and also completely, which is crazy because when I think about, if you say for in the example of like I'm for you, it sounds supportive. And in this regard, it's saying that it means away or opposite and yet completely as well. So I'm already getting these vibes that are like this paradox. The more and more I research through the lens of spirituality, I'm finding that the grander truth of it all seems to truly manifest in everything I find as paradox, a both and, not an either or, not black and white thinking, but just a massive gray area that encompasses both sides to a situation that at first glance seem to be working against one another, but in the end are not. And so that's going to play a big part in our discussion tonight. So if you read further into the prefix for, it goes on to expand, like in forward, you have, in front of, before, near, and then also against, right? But especially, it says from the Old English, for, it would indicate a loss or destruction, but in other cases, completion. I would argue both destruction and completion through the lens of the life cycle that was mentioned so much in Clarissa Pinkola Estes' book, Women Who Run with Wolves. And so you can find more about that in the work of Carl Jung, and also looking into the hero's journey, which was detailed out by Joseph Campbell. So if you have interest, there's some places you can go and look and do more research. So forbid. So a for can mean both destruction, loss, and completion. Okay. Then also completely, away and opposite and completely, you have the Proto-Indo-European root of bid in forbid as, and I don't know how to pronounce this, but it's Buddha, Beudh, which means, look at this, be aware or make aware. Which is the whole premise of, the soul's journey and spiritual maturity represented in the hero's journey, and all these different stories that just provide, a different lens to understand and break down the hero's journey, right, through different characters and circumstances. So in the end, in the one sense you can look at it, which is a personal growth story. That's one way you can look at it, right? And so in that regard, it would be there would be destruction involved, which there always is in these stories. And then there would be a process of becoming aware, to make aware. And the end goal is for the awareness to be completed, a completion of awareness. Right? For innocence and naivety to be replaced with maturity. Okay, a mature psyche where the gatekeeper role has reached full maturity. And so that's the one lens of the maturity of the psyche, which goes hand in hand with spiritual maturity because of everything the hero experiences and how it's very supernatural. The helpers that are found along the way that just magically show up at the right time. And if you've been through some stuff in life, I'm sure just even me mentioning these particular things is going to resonate with you, and it does for me. And so I just thought that was really cool to break down the word forbid, right? Yeah. So here in breaking down that word forbid, we see right there the purpose that the obstacles serve, and that's why I say they appear to be obstacles, but really they are facilitators, right? They are the catalyst that drives the growth, and that either places the hero on the path, on the journey, or certainly accelerates it, the process, the awakening process for sure, right? So let's go ahead and break down some of these stories and take a look at the characters and everything, okay? Just reading off some notes before we get into that. I was talking about, the internal process within our psyche, the maturation process. I think that's how you say that word, maturation, the maturity process. It's when you hear about the archetypal term, the gatekeeper role, which is a part of one's psyche that is personified in a character in these stories. It essentially, and we're going to look at specific examples that hopefully will be very helpful for you, but it's essentially the initial gatekeeper role is representative of that insufficient or naive parent role of the psyche, which is why it's called the gatekeeper. It's the function in our psyche that when we're young, isn't quite done growing yet, like even in our 20s. I think there's even been research. I read this a long time ago. I would encourage you to look into it, but I believe there's been actual research that has determined that our particular part of our brains that govern discernment are, in fact, identifiably not mature. Until we're in our mid-20s, I believe. And so that's what's represented a lot of times in these stories via a parent that just seems to be, what's the word? Just kind of head in the clouds, sort of, funny and nice, but doesn't have a whole lot of common sense, and so there's usually a character that's in charge of the main character in some way, so typically a parent role, because the main character is usually a very young adult, right, like 18 or so, 19, and so that's the problem, that's the issue in these stories, and so, but that's what that means. And then we have you might look at the resistance when it pops up in these stories. One term that may be used from the spiritual lens would be evil. And that we might say that acts as resistance. This is the paradox: to actually serve God to help mature the spirit. Okay, through the Christian lens, you might say to merge the human soul with the Holy Spirit, right? The cosmic marriage in that regard, right? A spiritual union within. So that's one lens to be thinking about as we're talking through our discussion. There's a lot of different lenses. I just encourage you to find what fits for you. And so either way, the end result is that we end up with a higher, more mature, and wise version of ourselves. Okay? Now, another thing to be thinking about as we're going through these examples, I believe that our journeys, depending on our different circumstances and the way our lives are playing out, how unique they are for each one of us, I believe that our journey can include actual characters that truly are external from us in our life. So as you're listening through these examples and you're trying to relate to them just to gain more clarity and meaning, when looking at your own life, consider that too. They don't have to represent only parts of your psyche. They can also represent people in your life that you can identify clearly as being, the facilitator of the challenge, you might say, or the villain, or the person or people that you may be able to identify as helpers. So I just encourage you to think that way too. Just expand your mind as we go through the discussion. All right, so here's the typical way that I've been able to identify these stories go. So a lot of times these stories, the main character is personified in a young woman. And so a maiden, you may say. So typically it starts with the maiden having a gift of some kind, okay, which would, you might argue, represent our innocence, okay, the gift of innocence. Because it's kind of like that saying, ignorance is bliss. It's like, you just truly, when you don't even know to identify evil in the world because you're not even aware it exists, it's a pretty sweet place to be, but you're very at risk, you're very vulnerable. And so in that regards, for your own protection, which we're going to get into talking about that, we have to learn and grow, right? Because the Bible instructs us to be wise as serpents and innocent as doves. So, but it always starts out, it seems to me like, with the maiden having a gift that is symbolic. Okay? The next step is that we, sometimes we can get a glimpse of their treasure or their higher self. It's like there's a longing, there's a calling, it's almost like if you look in these stories or these movies, a lot of the Disney movies, you'll be able to identify some type of foreshadowing, or like a premonition that the main character has, or something that's a clue that's indicating that there's more. It may even be in the music, in the words, in the songs. It may be in the symbolism if you know to look for that. But there's some type of clue to the higher self, the treasure that is to be attained down the road. And then what's really interesting is the gift that the maiden starts out with must be sacrificed to receive not only the treasure. When I got to looking at these stories, this was really interesting to me. It wasn't really like a trade-off. The maiden ends up, or the hero, personified by the maiden in these stories a lot of times, ends up with more, way more than what she had in the beginning. And so I believe that the gift that the maiden has in these stories is amplified or just exaggerated in these stories a lot of times in the beginning for a reason, to draw attention to it primarily. But it starts out with this gift that if you know to look for it, you can identify it. And I think we identify it without even labeling it as such, as a gift, but it's just there and we notice it. It may even be their circumstances, like, for example, I'm thinking of Aladdin, which was not even one that I included. I probably should have. But, Jasmine, she had this privilege of her social status in her society in the movie. And that was her gift, you may say. And she was totally willing to give that up, right? And so, sometimes the character is clumsy with their gift. Like, I'm thinking about Elsa with her powers that she had, and they were really burdensome to her. But it was kind of like that was the focus of the story in the beginning, besides the drama with the family and what went down with her parents. But, was her powers and, how dangerous they were because she had not learned how to handle them yet. So there's always something special that the main character has that will have to be either transformed or sacrificed. And then instead of being replaced by the treasure, we will see that the main character, the maiden, ends up with a replacement and the treasure. And so there's always even more than what was expected, right? Not that any of it was really expected. It was just, if you follow these stories through the eyes of the main character, I don't think a lot of times they even know the outcome, like if it's going to be a good outcome or not. Just like in the hero's journey, when the hero ventures through the underworld, it's a sort of a death of the ego, right? And so it's just a very dark place sometimes where we don't know where we're going to make it out of a certain situation. And so so let's take a look at some examples here about the gifts. Okay, so in Rapunzel, or Tangled, the movie Tangled, the Disney movie, her gift was her hair, right? It was magical. She could wrap it around wounds and it would make it new again. And so that was her gift, and it was replaced in the end by her magical tears. She never knew that her tears were magical and had the same power. And so even though she lost her hair, her magical hair, that was replaced, and yet that still wasn't the treasure. The treasure was, finding her true love and also reuniting with her family of origin, which is a very common thing throughout these stories, is where the character makes full circle, just like in the circle of the hero's journey, right? Same thing. So yeah, she was found her true love and was reunited with her family of origin. And then we have in the book I referenced, Women Who Run with the Wolves, there's the story of the seal woman in Sealskin Soulskin, and she came from the ocean, and she wound up getting married, and it was a very oppressive marriage, and they had a child, and in the end she knew she had to return to her family of origin under the water, and it was her child who really was the treasure, who also helped her get back what she had lost, which was her skin or her pelt. I think it was referenced in the story. So she got that back, and she got the treasure of her child. And then we have Vasilisa. This one's a little bit tricky. This was the only one that I referenced, but I wanted to keep it in here as an example because the main character in this story is a child, and so it's a little bit different. She's not going to wind up with finding her true love or getting married. But what happened in Vasilisa, she lost the gift of her mother's guidance, but that was replaced early on in the story by the doll that she kept in her pocket. So that she already had her replacement through the story, and then she wound up with the treasure of the results of refining what the doll represented, which was her intuition. So she carried that with her. She learned to refine it, and then she was gifted with the treasure in the end, which was freedom from her abusers. And then we have Moana, who lost her grandmother. She was very close to her grandmother, and she lost her, and so early on. And then I feel like in Moana, the grandmother was, because they were so close, it kind of came across to me like she was the only one in Moana's family who really understood her. And so, therefore, she was the only one that made Moana feel validated in her true self and identity. And so, when she lost her grandmother, she was also, during the same time, she was struggling to find her way and her place in the world, and her true purpose and calling in the world. It's like deep down she knew, but she was being discouraged from it because of the fear that her parents had, especially her dad. So, but she lost her grandmother, and then, she actually her spirit visited Moana along the journey. So she served as a helper role as well, which was beautiful. But I would say that, when she lost her grandmother, she visited Moana, accepted the message and stopped questioning it. And then in other words, if her grandmother represented her true knowing about her calling, her true calling in the world, then she lost that, and then she got it back, and then in the end, her treasure was her place in her tribe was to be the leader, and so that was her treasure in the end. So and then Belle in Beauty and the Beast lost her father and her freedom. She got both of those back. And then she was gifted with the treasure of marriage, right, to the prince. Elsa and Anna lost their parents, and they also grew up without one another. They didn't even have one another's company. They were separated to keep them protected, right, because of Elsa's powers that she didn't know how to use properly. And then they got each other back. They didn't get their parents back, but they got one another back. So when they were children, they had, they were very close as sisters, and they had one another, and they could play together, and they lost that, and they got that back. Okay? And then they also had, Olaf, which was a helper role in the story. And then in the end, their treasure was peace in their heritage, because they got one another back, and it was kind of like a fulfillment of their purpose as well. And peace as leaders in their kingdom. And then we have the handless maiden, where she lost her hands. This was another story in the book Women Who Run with the Wolves, but she lost her hands, and they actually in the end grew back. She had replacement silver hands for a little while, but then her actual hands grew back, and she also is gifted with the treasure of marriage to the king. So you might view it like the treasure being forbidden. It may be a forbidden love. It may be a forbidden destiny. But it's ultimately, one's destiny, one's place in the world, right? The characters, in the end, you might use adjectives such as peace and authority and love to describe what fills their life, or what their life is like after they have obtained the treasure. And then typically there's a celebration too at the end of these stories, right? Of their new life, or their new way of life, and typically that includes some type of child or marriage or leadership role, something like that. And that celebration at the end is meant to symbolize the completion of the hero's journey, or that the higher self has been found, or that God has been found through the spiritual lens, right? Something has been traded, right? A price has to be paid if you look for it in these stories. And this was something new to me. I had not recognized until very recently. But it says, and there has been a numinous marriage to the higher self, right? Or to the Holy Spirit through the Christian lens. So again, I just encourage you to apply your own lens. And what's also interesting is when they make the full circle, it's actually a return to the same environment. But it's transformed. And a lot of times this is represented, creatively through the use of, the colors. They may start out kind of, dim and dark and stormy. And then in the end, it may be very bright and, colorful and beautiful. Just a wonderful atmosphere. A paradise on earth, and so, but yeah, it's the same environment. They return to the same environment, but there's joy there, right? Instead of oppression and darkness. So, ultimately, like I said, this symbolizes the maturity of the spirit or the soul's journey. The qualities obtained, this is just my opinion, from completion, of the journey would be resilience to resistance or obstacles, right? They can brush things off easier. They're unbothered because they're wiser. They're wiser. They can avoid traps, and they know that they can avoid traps because they've already been there, right? It's the same way for us. They can in turn serve a higher role, and we usually see that at the end of the movie, either as a wife or a husband, a mother, a father, a leader of the tribe, a king, a queen, etc. And then being able to be a leader of other characters symbolizes that the leadership role of the psyche has been switched out. That gatekeeper role, right, that started out being naive, the fun-loving, but the very, the nice, but the very ignorant parent role, right? The gatekeeper role, the discernment, that's not really functioning much at all because it hasn't had enough life experience to do so. See, at the end of these movies or stories, when that main character is filling a leadership role, leading other characters, it symbolizes that the leadership role of the psyche, the gatekeeper role, has been switched out to a more mature gatekeeper that instructs all the other aspects of the psyche, right, which all the other characters represent. Now I want to look at the forces at work. So we have the villain role, the gatekeeper role, the helper role, those specifically. Now, the villain's purpose appears like I said earlier, to be a blockage to the hero's treasure, but it's actually the path to the hero's treasure. So just another divine paradox, right? Goes right along with that Bible verse that God works all things for the good of those who love him. Something you might keep in the back of your mind, just to be curious about, is we're talking about the rest of this topic here tonight is the trickster, the archetype of the trickster. And I definitely want to make more videos on that, but it's just something to think about. So the villain's purpose, like I said, appears to be a blockage to the hero's treasure, but is actually the path to the hero's treasure. The initial gatekeeper's role is our immature discernment, like I said, poor judgment, lacking experience. And then the temptation from the villain or the facilitator is to replace that function. Okay, so this is really interesting, the function of the gatekeeper. What is the function of the gatekeeper? If it's a parent role, it's protection. It's protection. And so what happens is that is lured away. It's the same thing as when you come under the spell of a controlling person who wants to be in control of your mind and bribes you very subtly in certain ways to just kind of switch off that connection that you have with your inner guidance and let them take over. And so there's been a trade-off, okay? It's always that gatekeeper role. It starts off getting hijacked by the villain. And then, all this stuff goes down, lessons learned, right? And then in the end, it's filled by a more mature version. So let's take a look at this, okay? So Rapunzel, in Tangled, the Disney movie Tangled specifically, because I think there's different versions of these stories. But the mother role, which isn't her true mother in this movie, she would always tell Rapunzel that she was kept locked in the tower for her protection, which through Rapunzel's eyes probably seemed valid because she had this really long hair that was magical. And so to her, see, when you're psychologically abused or controlled, that's what's hard because you can see what a controlling person is pointing out. And you're like, well, yeah, that makes sense. But see, what she didn't realize was that the magic that her hair held was being exploited for her fake mother to benefit from. Okay, she was a con woman, and so she was just staying eternally young by keeping Rapunzel confined and imprisoned. Okay, but what was stated, the false facade, the front, the hook, right, that kept the main character, the maiden, under the spell was the concept of protection. Just like in the red shoes, the story, the red shoes, in Women Who Run with the Wolves, the girl had handmade red shoes. Yeah, they probably wouldn't have held up forever because they were handmade, but she loved them. They were her own. She made them herself, and so they were special to her. She was coerced, right, into giving them up, and then the woman who adopted her, replaced them, but they weren't right for her, right? And so it's always a trade-off here. And so, yes. So the gatekeeper role that was sabotaged in Rapunzel, Entangled, was her real parents. Her real parents, she was stolen from them in the beginning of the movie. And so they went away. The gatekeeper always goes away early in the movie, okay? And it's replaced under the guise of protection. But really, there's another ulterior motive, a hidden motive, okay? Exploitation. The helper, role in this movie was, I believe his name was Flynn, but his real name was Eugene. And so, and he was the helper, but he became part of the treasure in the end as well, because he was her true love. So very interesting. And then as we go through, I just encourage you to look for patterns here. So then we're going to look at Sealskin, Soulskin, which was a story in Women Who Run with the Wolves. The husband in that story was the villain. Okay, he was very oppressive. Again, a lot of times, if a young maiden is coerced into a marriage by someone who's oppressive, and controlling, the lure or the hook is protection. And then the gatekeeper role there was her family that remained underwater, the Seal Woman's family, right? That role was switched out, and it was not true protection. He was actually the one to be protected from. And so the helper in that story was her son, who helped her to get back her pelt, right, her skin. And then her son also was the helper and the treasure from the story. So then we have Vasilisa, the stepmother, was the villain, and she lured, or coerced rather, Vasilisa to go through the woods to the cottage, the witch's cottage, to seek coal for their fireplace to stay warm. So in that regard, there's a little bit more details to it, but the purpose of Vasilisa having the stepmother was so that she could direct her on, how to do her part to keep herself and her stepmother and stepsisters protected, right, and safe and warm through the winter. So again, we have this theme of self-preservation or protection, right? And so that was the lure, but the true intentions of the villain, the stepmother, and Vasilisa was Vasilisa's demise. So she told Vasilisa if she went out through the woods and obtained the coal and brought it back, she would be safe and warm from the cold outside, because they could, start a fire. But that's what she told her. But the real reason for sending her out in the woods was hoping that the witch would kill her, so her demise. The gatekeeper role in Vasilisa, right at the very beginning, her mother passed away and her dad went away and left her with her stepmother, okay? Again, that gatekeeper role early in the stories always goes away. And then the helper in that one was her doll that she kept in her pocket. And, that was her treasure all along. It was her intuition, but she had to develop it and learn to trust it. So in the end, trusting it came through experience of testing it and finding out that it did in fact work through all these trials and tribulations that the witch had put her through. And so that was a really interesting story. And then we have Moana. I struggled with finding the villain here. Her dad was the gatekeeper role, I feel like. But he also served a little bit as the obstacle to keep her from her purpose. He did not want her going out in the ocean. And then you have Maui, which he was the demigod. And on one hand, he was a helper in this story, right? But in another way, he may have also served as the villain, because he was really, this was a great example of the trickster role. It's kind of hard to tell with Maui, because he was actually the cause of the issue with the ocean and the gem that had been stolen. I'll have to drop the name down here of the goddess that it had been stolen from. And so that was all Maui's doings, so he wasn't like all good or anything like that. He had good and bad qualities, but he also was a companion for Moana, so that was really interesting. But the helper, for sure, I would identify as her grandmother, and I would say that Maui was a companion. And I feel like she struggled with her grandmother's loss throughout the movie, and then once she found her purpose, which her grandmother was a part of encouraging her to truly follow her purpose and fulfill it, it seemed to culminate in a peace that Moana found with letting her grandmother go. And so, and being at peace, right, with her passing over. So you may call that part of her treasure too, although becoming the leader of her tribe and being successful in making sure they all had food to eat was a wonderful accomplishment. And then we have Belle and Gaston, the very arrogant dude in the village. He was certainly the villain, and he he offered marriage to Belle, which, depending on the culture and the lens you want to look through and everything, the roles and tradition and things like that, you may view as protection, right? But if you listen to him when he goes to visit Belle and he's trying to convince her to marry him, and he just plops back in this chair and throws his feet up on the table and his muddy boots and everything, and he's rattling off the way he envisions their marriage, it becomes very apparent, which she never was even considering it, but it becomes very apparent to all of us watching this, right, that he has very selfish motives. Again, there's always this temptation of the main character that seems good. A lot of times it's protection, which would make a person hand over their gatekeeper role. And then once a person does that, now they're not even in charge of their own life anymore. They're not fulfilling their destiny anymore. They've been hoodwinked, they've been conned, they've been coerced by someone with bad intentions. And so he was very selfish, a very selfish character in Beauty and the Beast. The gatekeeper role in this movie was Belle's dad, super nice man, but just very flighty, you might say, and so he wasn't able to serve that gatekeeper role very well. And then the helper, I would argue, in Beauty and the Beast would be Beast. You might even consider the trickster role for him as well, just like with Maui, because it wasn't all good. Really, if you look at a lot of these, like Eugene in Tangled, right? He was living a life of stealing, and he was a con man running with I think a gang and stuff, and he turned his life around, but he wasn't all good either, and he was not only the helper but part of the treasure in the end. And some of these other roles are too, just like with Beast. She winds up marrying him, right? And then he's transformed as well. They transform one another. So in that regard, some of these truly do wind up a beautiful love story, and it's also symbolic of transformation for both characters. And so, again, you can look at this internally as personifications of one's psyche, and also just out in real life, right? So then we have Elsa and Anna in Frozen. I would argue that the villain, there were several villains in those movies, and it was the greedy townspeople. There was, the man that Anna almost married, but thank goodness she didn't. And then there was another man, I don't know who he was, that was trying to, come off as helpful for Elsa. just offering business deals, to help her with running her kingdom. And really, he was very selfish and had, hidden motives. So I just wrote greedy townspeople as the villains there. But they're always coming to the main character under the guise of help or protection in some way, but they have selfish motives. The gatekeeper role there, they were killed off early on. That was her parents. And then the helper role was fulfilled by one another. Anna helping Elsa, Elsa helping Anna, right? And then they also had Olaf, which was really interesting. And then the last one I'm going to illustrate here is the Handless Maiden again. The devil was actually in that story, and he lured, he did make a deal with the gatekeeper role, which was the dad of the Handless Maiden. He was very naive, underperforming. He did not protect the Handless Maiden. He did strike a deal with the devil, and the devil, the temptation was, material goods. And so that translated to an immature and naive gatekeeper role to her father as protecting his family. Like, oh, we'll be set. We'll be good from now on if he gives us all these material things. But he wasn't paying attention to the details of the deal. And in so doing, he fell into the trap. Right? He was ensnared. Now, in this story, there was a spirit that as soon as the Handless Maiden left her family of origin and started out on her wandering, into the dark underworld, and I just love the way, all the different ways this plays out. This is the adventure part of the story. In these movies and fairy tales, but there's a spirit that joins her early on in the orchard, and this is where she meets the king as well. He sees her and he falls in love with her, and the king in this story winds up being both a helper, who also goes through a lot of trials and tribulations with her, and is transformed with her, even though they're separated at times. But he serves as both a helper in that role and as part of her treasure as well, because they wind up getting married and having a family. So just really interesting. And I just want to encourage you, if you have interest, to be on the lookout for all these different aspects of personification, these characters and these stories, and how they can represent the different functions of the psyche, and just relate that to your own life and do some journaling and see what kind of dots you can connect, and what kind of puzzle pieces you can put together. But in the end, also remember the breakdown of the word forbidden, because even though something seems like a challenge, and I wonder if you've ever been like me. Sometimes it's just, I tell myself it's easy, like, well, if it's that difficult, then it must not be the right thing or the right path. You know what I mean? I think that sometimes we want to believe that the right thing, the right way, the right person, whatever it is, surely the universe will align everything so that it's easy, and that will be my sign. The fact that it's easy will be my sign that it's the right thing. I think sometimes we can fall into that trap. And in reality, if you look at these patterns, that's why I wanted to break down these patterns for you all. There's a sacrifice that has to be made. So from there has to be a stepping out on faith. And you have to, in order to sharpen your discernment, I say that, just make peace with the fact that, we're going to make mistakes. We're going to make mistakes until we learn and until we sharpen our discernment. And in doing so, there is a transformation that happens within us. And things don't have to be an either or, good for me or bad for me. It may truly all work together for the good of those who love God and who are knocking and seeking and asking, right? Just like it says, to seek and you will find, knock and the door shall be opened. And the first thing we're instructed to do is to ask, And so if you view your own life as being on a journey, and you view the obstacles that have been a part of your life, a lot of times you can look back and you can see how, you wouldn't be where you are today had it not been for those obstacles. And you can see how sometimes it's the actual obstacles that pave the way for your purpose, for your treasure, for your destiny. And so I share this with you in hopes that it's actually encouraging for you. Do I think we should all just run head on into the most complicated things, just assuming, if the easy path isn't the right thing, then the most difficult path must be the right thing? No, I'm not saying that. In fact, I encourage you not to engage in this extreme type of thinking, just kind of hang out in the gray area until you kind of make sense of some things and sharpen that discernment and start putting some things together. But I think that, pausing and being careful not just react, but not to make huge decisions on some thinking that hasn't been given the proper amount of time to come to full fruition. We need to be careful about that. We need to make sure that we are just investing the time that a particular decision needs. And I just hope that you're able to see the higher purpose in things sometimes, and to know that, when things get hard in life, it doesn't mean that that's the end all be all. It could very well mean that it's paving a way, a path for you that is, remember, not just going to replace what you had that was valuable to you, or that you thought was valuable to you, but really, it didn't serve you well. Okay, just like the gatekeeper role that really doesn't know anything. Anyway, it's not mature. It's not doing any good. There's no discernment really there at all. It's too naive. It's like, did you really lose it? I mean, you did lose it, but what was it really worth? You thought it was worth a lot, like those handmade red shoes. But those handmade red shoes would have probably fell apart in a year or two anyway. You see what I mean? So just I'm sharing this with you to be encouraged, because the pattern that seems to be replicated throughout time in these stories is that the gift you lost, whatever it is or was, through faith and remaining steadfast, will be replaced, and then some, and then some. And so I just encourage you to look for that when you're looking at these stories. So thank you so much for coming along to hear the message. I hope that you have a beautiful day, beautiful evening, whatever time of day it is for you. And I will see you again very soon.